Good evening, everybody. Welcome and thank you for coming to our second series. This evening, we've given it the title, Thinking Gay, Unmasking Media Impersonations that Challenge Therapeutic Choice. Why have we done that? Well, this week, we have had an undercover journalist come into one of the counseling sessions related to the work that we do. And we thought it would be a good idea to take a look at this behavior, which has happened many times before. So it's often a good thing to role reverse. And if you want to study somebody else's point of view or perspective, it's a good idea to put yourself in their shoes and reverse roles with them and try to get into the thinking that they are putting on a particular issue. So that's what we're doing. And I'm delighted that once again, my colleague, Dr. Laura Haynes, is with us. Hello, Laura. How are you tonight?
Hello, Mike. I'm fine. Good to be with you again. Mike, the phenomenon of undercover journalists and what they believe is a valid goal of exposing wrongful practices has become a standard in UK media circles. The issue of conversion therapy has had several examples of this activity. And tonight, we'd like to unpack this by examining a recent example, that of Emily Sargent, who approached Core Issues Trust as Rachel in April of this year. We'll be joined by two people who feel passionately about this approach to investigative journalism as it applied to the right to access pastoral and professional help. And if you'd like to read the story, you'll need to read it online at the Times. It's behind a paywall.
Great. And tomorrow evening, if you have the time, you might want to log on to the times.co.uk podcasts, Stories of Our Times. And there you will see Emily Sargent's podcasts that are going to be broadcast every Friday for the next 6 weeks. So what we thought we would do is listen to the podcasts and interact with the material and try to engage with some of the issues that clearly she wants to raise. So tomorrow evening is the first of Emily's podcasts, or perhaps it's even all day tomorrow. I'm not sure if there's a specific time when they're put up, but do have a look at it, listen to it. And then next Thursday, when we come back together, all being well, we'll have a panel of therapists who will listen to what Emily is saying and respond to that. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I'd like to introduce now the first of our guests. You already know him, Matthew Grech, and it's lovely to have you, Matthew. You're from Malta. You were here actually in the last broadcast, but introduce yourself a little so that friends who are here for the first time will hear something from you.
Certainly. Hi, everyone. It's Matthew Grech here. I'm 32 years old and counting, from Malta. And I left homosexuality when I was 19 years old. And that was very much motivated by my faith in Jesus Christ and understanding of the scriptures. And I'm just really delighted to be here. And I think it's going to be really interesting to take a deeper look at the other perspective and to really critique it for what it is. So thanks for having me.
So Matthew, I think you've read Emily Sargent's article in the Times magazine that came out on Saturday, early hours of Saturday morning this past week. Can you get the ball rolling? What was your reaction? What's your feeling having read it? Do you have any insight?
Well, I think the first thought that comes to mind is, why does she dare call it an undercover investigation? Because I think we can all agree that her motives were dishonest and she lied about so many things. And surely the audience cannot base their views on so-called conversion therapy on Emily's reporting. So I think the general public deserves to hear the real stories of those who have moved away from LGBT and experienced success and transformation. And it's not all as bleak as the media makes it sound, and especially Emily makes it sound. So yeah, I think that's what I can think about. And certainly, this idea of rejecting homosexuality being equated with homophobia. I would argue, with the same reasoning, does that mean that rejecting heterosexuality, on the other hand, makes one heterophobic or Christophobic? So I think these arguments just don't work, and they're just there to trick one's mind. So there's a lot that I could say, but I would like to perhaps make room for others as well.
Good. Well, we're going to do that. Do you want to take us forward a bit, please, Laura?
All right. Well, I've been around a long time. I've been a licensed psychologist for 40 years. And I am a member of the National Association of Professional Therapists, who help people who want to explore options to their same-sex attraction or want a gender identity in the United States, as well as I'm on the general board of the International Federation for Therapeutic and Counseling Choice, and I'm the USA country representative. So I've talked to therapists. I've presented at conventions of therapists, mental health professionals, medical professionals, and faith-based ministry folks, nationally and internationally, and pastors and priests. And so I've been around, I've talked to a lot of people on this issue, and I have yet to find someone who has done the things that Emily apparently is saying are characteristic of what we do. I think her presentation of what we do is a grotesque mischaracterization.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because she makes the comment that LGBT conversion therapy is legal in the UK. Now, what is she saying here? Because elsewhere, the definition of conversion therapy includes things like corrective rape, electroshock therapy. Now, surely corrective rape is something that is already outlawed. What exactly is she meaning? There's a conflation of ideas here. It seems as though any change-allowing therapies or anything that explores sexual identity is in question. And I think that's one of the basic concerns, certainly, that I would have here. Okay, I think it's time to introduce our other guests. So, Victor, would you introduce yourself? And then, Rob, would you introduce yourself? Tell us something about who you are and what you do.
It's nice to be here with you. I'm 25. I'm from Moldova. I am a YouTuber and a blogger. I work for Courageous Trust as well. And I struggled with gender identity, with same-sex attraction. And now, it's been several years since I decided I don't want to follow that identity. I don't want to pursue that direction. And I stand for the people who choose not to follow their undesired same-sex attractions.
Welcome, Victor. Rob.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Rob. I live in Bristol in England. I'm 33 and work as a translator. I identified as gay for around 5 years in my 20s, but I found it a very stressful and not the dream life that is depicted in the media. It basically was a war with my soul, and God called me out of it. through mental health problems, and so I've been living differently outside of that lifestyle for 2.5 years now.
You're so welcome, Rob. We're going to come back to you both in a few minutes, and we're going to have a discussion together about Emily's article. The idea is that we would be able to unpack it, look at it critically, and begin to see some of the issues that I think Laura and Matthew have already touched on. But we're going to, once again, change our focus, folks, because I want to suggest to you that one useful way of looking at the issues here is to think about the role of evidence. It seems to me that undercover journalists are looking for evidence. They are trying to use evidence in a certain way. They're trying to produce a set of facts that argues for a point of view that they feel particularly concerned about. If only it was done neutrally, if only it was done in a way that could lead to options, but often it doesn't. So what I want to suggest we do is we again look to another discipline to see how evidence works in that particular context. And as some of you know, if you've watched the first series, we were looking into the discipline of archaeology, and we were going back in time into the Roman world and looking at various issues in the city of Pompeii in the south of Italy. So we're going to do something slightly different tonight. We're going to go into the city of Herculaneum, one of the other Vesuvian towns that were covered when Vesuvius erupted in AD 79. And the issue, once again, is this question: had the gospel reached these towns before Vesuvius had erupted? Is there any evidence in these cities that would suggest that this has happened? So what we're going to see now is one particular find that caused a sensation in the late 1800s. And we're going to just talk through that and then look at how the evidence is applied and the different points of view about this. So watch this video. Little at the issues around the claim that the stucco plaster cross at the bakery shop in the Ariana Poliana in Region 6 of Pompeii is an authentic Christian symbol. It was discovered in 1813 by Francois Mazoy, an expert in ancient architecture. Almost 100 years later, in the nearby city of Herculaneum, an archaeologist recorded the finding of yet another cross shape, this time an indentation in the plaster on a wall in the House of the Bicentenary, recently reopened to the public. It's important to understand the difference between Herculaneum and Pompeii in terms of how the different societies were structured. Marcus Nonius Bulbus, who you can probably just make out down below, is all over the city. He's an example of a great patron of the city, eventually had a role in Crete and different places in the Roman Empire. Herculaneum had a vast number of slaves. We know that because there are inscriptions that list them. The interesting thing about Herculaneum is that there are lists of the various citizens who lived inside the city. We're going to spend a little bit of time looking into the city. Below me also you can see the places where up to 340 people died, probably waiting to be evacuated. Where we stand now originally would have been the sea, the ocean. So it's a place that helps us to understand that we are mortal, that we are flesh and blood, that we are not here forever, that there is life beyond where we are today. It's worth examining the controversy behind the cross shape found at Herculaneum, but it's the nature of the controversy that interests me. Enrich Dinkler, a noted biblical archaeologist, you'll remember, refused to recognize the bakery cross, partly on the dogmatic grounds he held that the cross was not recognized as a symbol of adoration before the time of the Emperor Constantine. Constantine popularized the cross in the 4th century, long after Vesuvius buried Herculaneum. But the site superintendent at the time of the Herculaneum discovery in the 1930s, Amedeo Maiori, supported the idea that the find at Herculaneum was a Christian symbol of devotion. In 1938, the remarkable discovery was made of a cross shape at the House of the Bicentenary in a room on the upper floor, engraved on the west wall on a white stucco plaster background. Underneath this was a carbonized wooden chest, according to the excavation notes. The discovery was kept secret for 18 months, but in June 1939, an article was leaked reporting the find as a Christian cross. Maiori then had to explain why he had withheld the information. Christian archaeologists responded that there were no known examples of the cross in a Christian context prior to the 2nd century and were doubtful of Maiori's interpretation of the find. Maiori's explanation of the furniture beneath the cross as a wooden altar, as seen in this artist's impression, was also in dispute. Now, for many, the question of whether the indentation in the plaster was really the remnants of a Christian cross was resolved in 1970. In that year, Stefano De Caro found a shelf support at the Villa Regina at Bas Coriali, which was believed to be similar to that which might have left the impression found on the wall in the House of the Bicentenary. In other words, the cross impression reported by Maiori as a Christian symbol was no more than the remains of a similar shelf support. This explanation effectively discredited the idea of Jesus' devotion in Herculaneum as evidenced by the cross in the House of the Bicentenary. So the question remains, is the cross shape, surrounded by nail prints in the wall, which Maiori believed were evidence of lost structure that concealed the cross, really a Christian devotional cross? Or is it merely the indentation and remains of a shelf support, similar to that discovered by Stefano De Caro at Bas Coriali in 1970? Placed side by side, the cross shape found at the Ariana Poliana and the cross shape found at the House of the Bicentenary in Herculaneum may have some similarity. Both need to be examined in their respective contexts. But the point to make here is to observe that holding a dogmatic position one way or the other will yield different interpretive results. Heinrich Dinkler would hold us to the idea that devotion to the cross was only known in the 4th century. It's worth remembering, however, that Jesus' devotion may have arrived at the town in several ways. We know that there were Jewish believers, possibly attached to the synagogue in the nearby town of Puteoli. We also know that many Christians migrated from Jerusalem to Campania during the Roman occupation before the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. And we shouldn't forget the vast number of slaves from Judea that would have been resettled in Campania after the Colosseum had been built. The Apostle Paul now, in Acts chapter 28, he lands at Pozzuoli, I believe. And that's
which is nearby, just
50 kilometers?
10 miles not from here. That's a grove line. Yeah, that's it.
So in Acts chapter 8, we're told that he arrives and he meets a group of Christians at that time and then goes on to Rome. So it seems to me that it's not impossible that there were Christians around this area.
There are actually a few scholars, especially the great archaeologist called Matteo della Corte, who definitely believes that there were Christians in Pompeii. He found graffiti and words, that he attributes to a little community of Christians living in the town.
This is the point that I would like to make here. I don't know about you, but I'm not left feeling terribly secure in terms of how to interpret this evidence. We're shown pictures and artists' impressions of a cross impression in the stucco plaster. It's broadly in the shape of the same cross that was found in the Ariana, Pollyanna, almost a century before that. And so I don't necessarily feel very secure about how to interpret this. We're told that the whole situation was turned upside down when a find was made in another building which showed a shelf structure, and if you remove the shelf, it's clear that the impression that was left in the plaster, according to what we're told, could have looked to be similar to what was found in terms of the cross found in the house of the Bicentenary. So the thing is, folks, how do we resolve this? Well, I guess on one side, we have to believe what we're told. We have to appeal to the experts who've seen the artifacts and have written them up. But the fact is, there's great disagreement and controversy around this. There's certainly, perhaps the majority of scholars say it's not a Christian artifact. But there are qualified archaeologists and historians who are arguing that this is indeed reminiscent of early Christian worship or Jesus devotion in the city of Pompeii. And it's this thing, this idea of always having to refer to what the experts say and then leaving it at that, that I think we have to look at very carefully, because I think when we turn our attention to our field, we often find that people make appeals to what the authorities say, and ordinary people are disempowered in terms of understanding the evidence. They have to work very hard to be able to understand the evidence. Okay, thank you. We'll come back to that, and let's continue now and get back to what we're talking about here today. Actually, I just wanted to make some points about the nature of evidence. So let's go back to where we were. Anybody want to continue with Emily's article? Any points that you want to raise about what has been said?
Mike, I have heard these kinds of grotesque mischaracterizations before and testified before legislative hearing committees in several states. And I heard the most creative, grotesque mischaracterizations, creative ideas of aversive or abusive methods. I have ever been surprised and amazed to learn the things that I do or did in therapy that I never knew I did. So I think that we just cannot take at face value the things that are being said.
Laura, I can really agree with what you're saying here. Emily says this, talking about me. She says, she contacts me, she uses the alias Rachel, and she says, he reassures me that I can become straight. Now, that is something very unusual, I think, for anybody to do, to just give the certainty that somebody can become straight. That is not something that characterizes the way we work in Core Issues Trust. And the second thing she says here, he tells me that he will put me in touch with one of his counselors. And just like that, I am introduced to a woman. Now, if you only knew the truth, how long it took me to find somebody and to set the appointment up, this is just very far from the truth. It's very interesting when I go back to the emails that I have when this person first contacted me. So I'm agreeing with you there.
Right.
I also
And
know that. Okay.
go ahead.
I know that there's a lot of inconsistencies in this article and things that don't seem to be true, but one of the biggest things that just annoy me and makes me frustrated is that she's basically lying at the questions that are being addressed to her from that therapist. And at the same time, she's making fun of it, she's mocking it, and it's her who just says that everything is being so harmful that there isn't any good result of that. But I just don't understand how can she expect something good to turn out of it when she is lying about her past traumas, her sexual abuses, her relationship with her parents, and because these are the very questions that are meant to expose those ones that apparently she never tried to heal or to touch. And I know that there's a point on that page where she promotes the podcast that is going to be out tomorrow. And she's saying something about being so affected, and that it's been so harmful, and it's being so emotionally draining. But of course, when you go back to some wounds and when you go back to some traumas, there is some pain there that has to be released first in order to receive healing, in order to just sort that mess out. It's a rational process.
Exactly. It's hard work. Therapy is always hard work.
And it takes two real partners. So the therapist is relating to someone she is not, and it doesn't feel like a match to her. Huge surprise. That's what she set up. That's what she ordered.
Yeah, and
it's actually very abusive towards the therapist as well, because the therapist is thrown into this fake scenario and is expected to give answers to a scene that is not even realistic. So it's abusive and very disrespectful towards the therapists themselves. So
yeah, it's not only sorry, it's not only disrespectful to the therapist. It's also disrespectful towards all the people who are seeking counseling and therapy, because there's a lot of people out there who are seeking help because of any reasons. And she's basically only promoting one side of the things, one point of view. She's not even mentioning anything about anybody who's been through a successful session of therapy, such a therapy. And there's hundreds of people like that. Like it would be absurd to be in 2021 and to not know about a person who's been through a successful session of such therapy or counseling or just discussion of pastoral care or something. So I don't know if she's realizing that she's completely just taking away the chance of these people to speak out. Like she's speaking on our behalf, and that seems to be something so unfair.
So let's role reverse. Let's put ourselves in her shoes. Emily believes that she needs to do this because this therapeutic approach or this activity that we're engaged in, whether it's therapy or counseling, is harmful. That's why she's doing it. So she feels that if she exposes something here, this is going to enlighten people and young people particularly are not going to take up the offer to explore sexuality in this way, because it's according to her always, it seems, dangerous and harmful.
Yeah, Mike, but she presents only 2 or 3 cases, I'm not sure, I don't remember, of people like that. And those people, I assume that are her friends. So they're obviously on the same side. So how can that be balanced? How can that be objective? And she's a journalist. She should know that, because when you're being a journalist, when you should be presenting people the facts just as they are, and you should give the people the chance to make their own opinions and draw their own conclusions. And if she's not saying, and she obviously knows about Courish's trust work, about X Out Loud, because she mentioned these organizations, and she could have very easily reached out to, let's say, at least one person who's been through that therapy or counseling, and she could also present the other side of the things, and say something like, draw your own conclusions. What's your opinion about that? But it's been like a communist article.
Victor, I think you made a wonderful point. She could have interviewed people who've actually had the therapy and felt they benefited from it. And this is what's being avoided constantly in the press. Now, why is that? We have to wonder why.
Well, it relates to the fact that when people phone Courish's Trust and they want to have an interview on Sky News or the BBC, and we say, well, sure, why don't you interview somebody from X Out Loud? And they refuse to do it every time. It seems as though they're happy enough for people who have, been doing it for years to continue doing these interviews, but they are not willing to interview the new voices. So I think that's exactly the question, Laura. Why? What's going on here?
It is biased journalism.
Sorry. What I find absurd is that she chose her role models, and she chose people who failed as her role models, people who didn't succeed in this journey for some reason or another. But according to your own goals in life, you always choose your own role models. And the thing is, for us, we know what we want. I'm 32 years old and I'm unmarried, but I would say I have a desire for marriage. So therefore, I choose my role models, and I have people around me who are older men than I am and have been married for years. And I look at where they are today, and I'm like, yeah, that's where I want to be in 20 years' time, 30 years' time. Yes, this is what I want. And look at them, have their own children. They have a successful and happy and blessed marriage. How beautiful to have those role models around us. But I think, anyone could choose a failure story and focus on it and put a spotlight on it. But really, what's that going to communicate? And is that balanced? Because I think as a journalist, your top priority is to present balanced views. So I think we need to investigate journalism.
Rob, I want to ask you a question. Do you think that what this is indicating is that journalists and perhaps the public more broadly just don't know enough about former LGBT people? They haven't met them. They're not perhaps visible enough. And who would want to be visible in this climate where such a voice would be met with skepticism immediately? Do you think that's part of the problem here?
It's hard to generalize, but it could be part of the problem, because obviously ex-LGBT people aren't given a voice in the media. So certainly if they're using the media to look for all of their information, they're not going to find stories like ours, people who have left the LGBT lifestyle. But as for just their own private lives or just being able to think for themselves, surely it has occurred to them that there are people who aren't happy with their same-sex desires or whatever it is, and might have explored a different direction and experienced change. So, yeah, generally I do think the media is going in one direction, but maybe these individual journalists are able to think, and they just, yeah.
Well,
So
I know
not reporting on it.
Go ahead,
I know
Laura.
in the United States, if somebody goes online and says, I'm coming out as gay, they will get one response. If they come online, at least in the liberal media, and say, I'm ex-gay, what happens to them? And is it like that in the UK? They get excoriated, they're told they don't exist, they're told they're liars, they're bigots, they're not believed, they're defamed. The bigotry, the abuse they take is just phenomenal. I mean, it takes courage for them to come forward, for all of you to come forward and tell your stories.
I'd have to say in the UK, I don't think they get their noses over the door. They're just not considered. That's the whole point. There is a kind of one viewpoint that seems to be common across the so-called legacy media. All of the older media, all of them take the same point of view and therefore reject anybody who seems to have a contrary point of view. And one thing I'd like to interject here is that how can we expect any different? Because in 2014, the Memorandum of Understanding was set up in this country, which meant that there is a de facto ban on anybody who holds the point of view that therapeutic interventions can be useful in exploring sexuality and may lead to change. So for almost a decade now, this country has prevented work in this area. So the culture, I would say, has been damaged. And now they want to take it one step further. They want to criminalize anybody who is involved in this work. I think that's a real concern.
Yeah.
The idea is that a viewpoint, the MOU, is that a viewpoint is harmful. But as I hear the stories of these men on this panel and many people I've talked to across the United States and around the world, they do not feel harmed by their Christian viewpoint or just their viewpoint that they didn't like, they didn't find living as LGBT fulfilling, and they wanted to live differently, and they feel more fulfilled now. But it's the idea that the view there's only one viewpoint, and that a viewpoint of change is in itself is harmful. Now, the latest study on research on this idea that of minority stress, that a viewpoint is harming LGBT people, and the viewpoint of society has to be changed. So the latest study on this, which was conducted by the originator of the minority stress theory and his colleagues, found that over 50 years of dramatically and progressively increasing societal affirmation of living as LGBT and a viewpoint about it, that the psychological stress of LGB identified people has worsened. So it does not appear that a viewpoint is the issue. And it doesn't appear that changing a viewpoint has been helpful, that erasing the idea that some people want to change and censoring their opportunity to do it has helped.
Well, I think that relates to something else that Emily said in her article. She says there is now a vast amount of evidence to show that conversion therapy practices not only don't work, but are deeply harmful, leading to depression, anxiety, self-harm, and suicidal thoughts. Can you comment on that, Laura?
Yes. There is, in fact, the American Psychological Association's task force, which was all LGBT members who were committed to the outcome of the study before they started, but they acknowledged that there was no research that meets scientific standards that could tell them that change-allowing therapy was harmful or ineffective. And that's still the case today. In fact, there was a study done recently, last year, by LGBT affirmative therapists, and they claimed that people who had had change-allowing help, whether it was religious or professional help, had higher suicide rates. And it was caused by the help that they had. They had, by the way, research that the data that told them what the suicide rates were before therapy and after therapy, so they could have compared to find out whether that rate of suicide after therapy was higher, lower, or the same. And they did not use the data they had on purpose, did not use the research and the data they had that told him the before therapy levels of suicide. So another researcher came along, a professor came along and got the data and included that data that had been omitted and found that actually the suicide rates went down after change-allowing therapy. So there's been study after study that does not look at before therapy mental health. It just takes a position, it uses logic that goes like this. People who have taken antidepressant medication are more depressed than people who have not. Let's get rid of antidepressant medication. The antidepressant medication is causing it. Well, actually, it's likely, if not probable, that people who are more depressed take antidepressant medication than people who are not depressed. The same with therapy. It is more likely that people who have more mental health problems and are more suicidal go to therapy of any kind than people who don't go to therapy. So they're constantly using this false logic and invalid method to stack up studies that don't prove what they're claiming. And none of these studies meet scientific standards. When you do this research with people where you take into account both sides, it comes out differently. And by the way, people who are from have the viewpoint that they would like the therapy, people of traditional values usually find the therapy helpful, and people of more liberal values may not like it. So there are different people, and they're being thrown, assumptions are being made from research done with one subgroup that they apply to everyone. And the research is coming out now saying it's not true. It's not true.
But Laura, if you were to raise that, if you were, given the opportunity that you've just been given to explain that as clearly as you have, I can hear activists saying, but the Royal College of Psychiatrists says, or the APA says, or the UKCP. So this is what I'm talking about. It's this appeal to authority that completely ignores the empirical evidence that you're talking about.
That's right. And bear in mind, they usually all go back to the APA, American Psychological Association's report of 2009, including the MOU does, a earlier version. Later versions don't give. There's very little research that's being cited here. But the APA task force said they could not find, they had no research that met scientific standards that showed them the therapy was harmful or ineffective. Now, they went on to conclude that these people, and they acknowledged people reported that they changed sexual attraction, behavior, and gender identity through therapy. But they couldn't believe it, because they said one of their key scientific findings was that sexual orientation doesn't change through life experiences. Well, 5 years later, the American Psychological Association's Handbook of Sexuality and Psychology said that there are associative and potentially causal links between childhood sexual abuse and having same-sex partners, based on research that includes a 30-year study of documented cases of childhood sexual abuse. Now, I have yet to see further statements of the APA come to terms with their own handbook. But what are they going to do? Start a book burning?
Exactly. So now, folks, let's just go back to our three guests for a minute, because Laura and I have been rattling on about empirical evidence and therapy. But here are three men who I don't even think went through formal therapy. They had a point of view. They had a Christian experience, and they had a sense of devotion about their lives that drove them on towards the goal that they wanted to achieve. And what I notice is each of them had quite a strong reaction to what Emily is saying here. So Victor, Rob, and Matthew, help us to understand, what is the passion that drives you when you read this kind of thing? What comes to you? Why do you get passionate about this?
In my case is because I'm talking to a lot of people, and there are a lot of them who are not Christians, for example, and they say that they don't like this lifestyle. They don't want to pursue that identity. They don't feel comfortable doing those specific acts that they're doing. So why should be these people banned from getting help? And let's say that this conversion therapy ban would kind of protect everybody else but Christians. I mean, if I know that they kind of through this banning will affect those who are who hold Christian values, and they just want to leave this identity behind because it doesn't align with their Christian values. Why should they be banned from that? Because they're not being influenced by somebody. It's just their personal beliefs. It may be different, let's say, theoretically speaking, with people coming from a different background. But what about those who just hold on to some personal, very personal values?
Good point. How about you, Rob? What makes you passionate when you read Emily's account here?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's appropriate that anyone who has been through therapy is sort of sets himself up as a judge of whether or not it's effective, because obviously they'll have their own prejudices of whether or not it was successful. Maybe she, even if she were to be completely straight, I would not deem her an appropriate person to say this is an amazing job, therapy course, because she's not independent. It's almost like somebody who's got in a school and doesn't like that school and is taking the place of the Ofsted inspector and giving it a bad review. You need somebody independent who has not even been through it, so that they can look at the whole body of evidence, look at all of the people who've been through it, both people who've benefited and people who maybe haven't. So first of all, as we've already said before, she is definitely not the person to be doing an investigation. It's not an investigation. Secondly, her points about there being problems with suicide and anxiety and all of that. What about the people who are feeling those things when they're in the LGBT lifestyle? Why is it always pain? Why are we always told that they're always so happy when actually they're not, because it's a very unstable place with cheating, people in open relationships, people doing drugs, people addicted to alcohol. all of this stuff, and it's really, really bad for your mental health, really just so bad. And it really annoys me that she sort of seems to think it's dangerous if you move away from that. I mean, is it dangerous to be straight? Each species in the world is designed to reproduce. So I don't see why it's a problem if somebody can move from being homosexual to being straight, because that is how God has made everyone to reproduce. And so, honestly, it really frustrates me what she's written. It's very unfair and biased.
So I guess in a way, maybe Emily is forgetting the fact that there is a very significant number of mixed attracted persons who are attracted in both directions. And there seems to be a ban on anybody accentuating or exploring the heterosexual side of those mixed attractions. If they want to get the gay affirming therapy, they can do that. But the other side, they can't do that, it seems to me. Matthew, how about you? Where does your passion come from in doing the work you do, and in your reaction to what Emily's written here?
Sorry, I was muted. I think what strikes me is that there was a very clear attempt to discredit the church, and mentioning the ministry of deliverance as if anybody who practices the ministry of deliverance is crazy. I think that is really offensive to many Christians, actually. And also, she seemed to have a problem with so-called religious loopholes, in the conversion therapy consultation in the UK. And, as if she's saying that pastors should not be allowed to pray over people and use the power of the Holy Spirit to set people free. It's man does not do it; it's God who does it anyway. But what is this thing about targeting prayer, or targeting counseling that comes from pastoral carers? So what concerns me is that really and truly this is aiming to attack the church and to kind of place the church under lockdown, really. And of course, anyone who raises their fist against God is really in the wrong place. So I think it's very clear that it's an anti-Christian, anti-gospel, and I think that's what strikes me. And I look at my church, for example, and I'm really grateful. I see men and women around me who were set free from LGBT, and they are much more fulfilled now, and they feel like they can actually reach their goals for marriage and enjoy their biological children. Mm-hmm. And they're filled with excitement. And if you had to ask them, if you had to think again, what would you choose? They'll choose Jesus over and over again.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's really where my passion is as well.
Well, I think that's valid, Matthew. If you think about what's happened in the UK, it's the British Humanist Society that has taken the lead. It's the National Secular Society that has called for a ban on conversion therapy, as the humanists did. Now, it's clear there's a war here, and gospel values, Judeo-Christian values that have become part of the society, obviously, are at issue here. Mm-hmm. Folks, I want to just take us on a bit more. I don't know if any of you have come across Julie Bindle's book, Straight Expectations. Here's another example of an undercover person who went to the US to speak to Janelle Hellman, probably one of the foremost psychotherapists who knows a great deal about lesbianism. She went over there and same thing, went through the therapy and then came back and wrote her book, Straight Expectations. Before that, it was Patrick Strudwick who had done something similar. And of course, Matthew, in April, I think it was April, May of this year, Joe Willis was another one who came in your direction. Just say briefly what happened there, would you?
Yes, well, Joe, well, so-called Joe, because it's not his actual name, is it? But he came forward asking, claiming that he really wants to pursue heterosexuality, and he claimed to really need help and support. So I gave him some of my time. Initially, it was a phone call, and then it became a Zoom call. He accepted to have a video call, and he was just asking questions, and I was sharing my views. Very simple. And it finished with a good prayer, a very simple and honest prayer. And yeah, I was just sharing a little bit about what I was seeing around me and how people who surrendered their hearts to Jesus actually and pursued wholeness in their heterosexual identity were much more fulfilled. And he claimed to have really enjoyed that session, and he wanted to have another one. And I think it was the day after that his supposed friend messages me saying he really feels so great after this session, and I'm wondering if I can book a session as well about something completely different. I was like, oh, praise God, you know. But it was, I mean, it's unbelievable to what extent these people would go to achieve some kind of hidden agenda that they have. And it's honestly going nowhere. And I just hope that the public would wake up to the reality of how absolutely foolish and ridiculous this is.
Take a look at this video, folks. I think it's maybe really instructive to listen to Patrick Strudwick on the Victoria Derbyshire show. This was recorded a few years ago, but I think there are some points here that are really worth reflecting on.
Well, Patrick Strudwick, who is the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender editor at BuzzFeed, who underwent gay conversion therapy whilst filming Undercover. Welcome to you. And to Mike Davidson, director of the Core Issues Trust, the organisation which ran that seminar in London recently, and who was banned 2 years ago from the British Psychodrama Association because, as a founder member of the Core Issues Trust, you were in breach of the ethical code of both the British Psychodrama Association and the UK Council for Psychotherapy.
That's correct.
Thank you for coming on the programme. Isn't what you're doing effectively modern-day quackery?
Certainly not. We want to be very safe. We want to be transparent. That's why we're open. We're not trying to hide anything.
And what's your aim?
We're aiming to support people who want to voluntarily move away from behaviours and feelings, if that's possible. We want to give them the option and preserve their rights and freedoms to do that.
You don't call it gay conversion therapy. Why not?
Well, because we're not in the business of converting people in the sense that we're not proselytizing. We have people coming from a no faith background, a different faith background.
But you do want them to change, don't you? In the way that you yourself believe you have changed, having had homosexual experiences in the past.
It's not about our agenda or a therapist's agenda. It's about listening to the client, dealing with whatever it is that they bring on the day, and standing with them as they work out the options that are appropriate for them.
Patrick, you went undercover, as I said, so you experienced gay conversion therapy. Tell our audience what happens.
Well, there's basically two approaches that these supposed therapists use. Because they believe that homosexuality is an illness, a mental health condition, they believe that that comes as a result of some sort of early childhood trauma. So the first thing they do is to look into that trauma. They come into the room with the agenda that you have been damaged, you have been wounded. So they will look for it until they find it. And so, for example, in my case, the therapist asked me if I'd been sexually abused. I said no. She said, I think it will be there. On the other hand, they give what could be seen as almost laughable advice to become heterosexual. So, for example, I was told to take up rugby. Because, of course, if you're a gay man, being in a rugby scrum is going to make you feel less gay. I was told to stand naked in front of a mirror, touching myself and affirming my masculinity. I was told to have weekly massages with a male massage therapist as a way of making me less gay.
Did you have to pay for this therapy?
I did indeed, and the person who gave me that advice was a psychiatrist whose name is Dr. Paul Miller. And he admitted that he himself still uses gay pornography. And it's interesting to hear Mike talk about his change, but at the same time admitting that he still has homosexual tendencies. The fact is, Mike, that the audience will not know this, but I met you while I was undercover. And it was very clear to me then, as it is today, that you are simply gay as a goose and you just can't admit it. You need to come out of your deluded state. You need to accept who you are, be who you are, and stop causing harm to vulnerable gay people.
Well, I think, Victoria, this is the problem that we face in Britain today.
You can talk to Patrick
it's
directly.
people putting labels on other people. I don't want to be labelled as a gay man. I've moved away from homosexual practices, and as I've continued to do that, I have found that the feelings have diminished. I think
How many people have you made
Sorry,
straight?
Patrick.
How many people have you made straight?
Oh, there are several on their way. The difference
if it works, then it would work the other way, wouldn't it? If it works, it would work the other way.
Patrick,
Let him answer and
the
then you can
problem is, when you went undercover, how many times did you attend? Twice. And
So
once,
it would have
one of
worked
them
if I
was
just
a
stuck at
Skype.
it.
My clients are with me for a year, at the very least. And there are always different outcomes, but I'm afraid you were out to discredit a therapist. Your goal was not about getting any therapy. You were a person who was determined to bring down a therapist. You weren't a client.
I held a mirror up to what was really going on.
Can
if
I
it
ask,
works,
in terms of the numbers...
sorry, can I just
check the numbers and then you can come back? How many people do you believe you have changed, transformed, converted, whichever adjective you would like to use?
The outcome is always various, but I'm seeing at the moment about 5 people a week. Most of them are in therapy for at least a year. Now,
And in terms of the outcome?
Many of them will move to a position of management of those feelings. Because they
Suppression.
don't
It's just
it's
suppression.
not suppression, it's transformation.
Can you give us some numbers?
How many have changed? I suppose this year I would say I have seen 3. But you know what? You have to wait. There's a test of time. There's a maintenance issue. We're not talking about flipping a switch, which is what the gay conversion shorthand terminology is all about. That's why we don't use it. We don't flip switches. This is extremely complex.
If it worked,
therapy is nuanced.
if conversion therapy worked,
It worked for me, Patrick.
If it worked, oh really? If it worked, you would be able to convert people the other way. Could you make Victoria
We're not
Derbyshire a lesbian?
converting people.
Could you?
Could you?
If that was her goal and she wanted to become a lesbian, there would be therapists who would be more than happy to affirm you in your lesbian desires.
Isn't that unethical?
That's not
Isn't
where
that
aiming
what is
at.
unethical? I mean, I look at the various
Yes, it is.
professional... Yes, it is unethical.
Yes, for gay affirming people not to give the full range of options both ways.
You're
That's
a
what we
charlatan.
need
This
to do.
is just quackery.
Can I just...
You've been
read you-
discredited, you've been thrown out of your professional body, and here you are, still maintaining that you can make people straight.
Absolutely.
And you're not even straight yourself, it's perfectly obvious. You're just in denial.
Let me read some... these are from various professional bodies around the UK. The British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy says there's no scientific, rational or ethical reason to treat people who identify within a range of human sexualities any differently from those who identify solely as heterosexual. The British Psychological Society has published guidance which says as same-sex sexual orientations are not diagnosable illnesses, they do not require any therapeutic interventions to change them. The British Psychoanalytic Council states the BBC does not accept that a gay orientation is evidence of disturbance of the mind or in development. And so, I mean, there's the Royal College of Psychiatrists. I can go on and on and on. Are you not simply preying on people who are vulnerable, who might be confused about their sexuality, who might worry about it, who might be anxious about it?
The point is we need to have checks and balances always, all of us, on both sides of the equation. We're not
There's no checks and balances on you because anybody could set up to be a counsellor.
There are checks and balances on me.
You're not a professional body.
There certainly are.
What are they?
We are working through all sorts of organisations in the US.
What are the checks and balances?
Well,
in the US?
In the US
there's no recourse for
and
someone
also
in Britain
Europe.
against a snake oil merchant like you.
A snake oil merchant. There you go again. Patrick.
Your theories have been discredited. You've been thrown out of your professional body. You know,
and here we still are,
apart from the fact that it doesn't work, apart from the fact that it doesn't work, apart from the fact that it doesn't work, there is a much more severe, dangerous side to this. I have seen the harm it does. I have seen the self-harm scars on people that have been through this. I have heard the stories of people who have attempted suicide as a result of going through
We're not listening to the voices.
Can you just finish? And what has led them to those extreme measures?
Because when you go through conversion therapy, you are told again and again that there is something wrong with you, that you can change. And when it doesn't work, because it never does, people blame themselves and they feel even worse. There was a study done by clinical psychologists more than 10 years ago which found that the majority of people that go through conversion therapy suffer worsened mental health result. They suffer increased rates of depression, anxiety, self-harm and suicidal tendencies. And furthermore, 2 years ago, the head of the world's biggest conversion therapy organisation, Alan Chambers from Exodus International, admitted it never worked. He then apologised to gay people for the harm he had done and immediately shut down the organisation.
The British government will not ban so-called gay conversion therapy. They say it would be complex as it could prevent lesbians, gay men and bisexual people from seeking counselling or therapy because they are distressed about an aspect of their sexuality.
No, this is nonsense. Gay people go to therapists all the time who are unhappy being gay because, of course, we live in a homophobic culture. It's hardly surprising that people struggle coming to terms with that. And therapists deal with that all the time. They deal with it in a very good way by exploring how they feel, by allowing them to come to terms with who they are and accepting who they are.
There needs to be options
we need things in place to protect people from these dangerous charlatans. The first thing the government should do is introduce statutory regulation for psychotherapists and counsellors so that you can't just set yourself up as a therapist like Mike here and start charging people.
This is a very unbalanced conversation. Can I respond to that?
Of course you can.
I think it's important to remember that the research that Patrick is citing there by Schindler and Schroeder was representing people who were already depressed and in a bad way before they began the therapy.
And it made it worse.
The methodology has been discounted so many times. We have asked for the peer-reviewed journals and evidence that show categorically, on average, that such therapeutic support is harmful, and it has not been presented because it doesn't exist.
Love needs no cure. Bigotry needs a cure.
Let me read these messages.
We're not bigoted.
On social media.
You are.
No, we're not.
Look in the mirror, Mike.
No,
you'll see
not.
a bigger and you'll see a gay man.
No, we're not.
Okay, let me read these
You
messages.
want to impose a label.
Thank you.
You want to oppose your agenda on vulnerable people.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike Davison. Thank you, Patrick Strudwick. Let me read these messages on social media. Stephen Hughes on Twitter says, gay conversion therapy sounds disgusting and completely backwards. I'm certain a person doesn't wake up one day, look in the mirror and say, oops, I'm gay. I better sort that. It is truly shocking. Jane Booth on Twitter. These aren't therapists. Therapists should accept their clients, not brainwash them. This is disgraceful. Nat Com on Twitter. To ban this therapy is to treat gay people like children who can't make decisions for and about themselves. And Angela on email, people have got this so wrong. Christianity is not about making anyone do anything. Christianity respects the choices people make, and the idea that it is out to eradicate a group of people for their lifestyle choices is utterly untrue. Christians will help anybody who wants to stop a homosexual lifestyle only if that's what they want. And if they want it, shouldn't they be allowed to have it?
Absolutely.
OK. Thank you both. Thanks for coming on the programme.
Well, folks, I think it would be useful to get your reaction to that. It's maybe, yes, go ahead, Laura.
I'd like to respond to a couple of things,
Sure.
at least. Okay, so one is he referred to Alan Chambers, the president of Exodus International in the United States. Exodus is a global organization around the world. The part in the United States is just one piece of it. Now, and the rest, and it all goes on, continues to this day. Alex Chambers misrepresented his own organization. There had been a longitudinal study done on members of Exodus. And in that, it was a 6 to 7 year longitudinal study published in a peer-reviewed journal. And they actually found that a majority of the people who were followed over that time reduced or effectively overcame their same-sex attraction. They either didn't have it anymore, or it had reduced to the point that it didn't bother them, and they were able to go on and live life the way they want to. Some people were still continuing. They'd apparently benefited enough that they wanted to continue. There were some who decided they were gay, and so, you know, from the point of view of the world, that's not a failure either. So he actually was not representing the members, anyone but himself. He was invalidly generalizing from himself to everyone else. It's scientifically proven he was false. Okay, it was wrong. The other members and faith-based organizations who were members of that organization disagreed with him. They left. They left Exodus. They're the ones who closed it down in protest. They left and reformed elsewhere otherwise. So they're the ones who closed him down. He did not close Exodus. They closed him down. He had nothing left but a shell. And that was
And
that.
isn't it true, Laura, that apart from what happened to Exodus International, why is there no mention of Restored Hope Network, which surely today has gathered almost as many ministries and support groups that Exodus International?
That's where many of them reorganized. There were other organizations as well. They just reorganized because they disagreed with him. He did not represent anyone but himself.
Right.
Okay, now the other thing I wanted to say was on the Schindler and Schroeder study. This was a study where an activist organization, two organizations, one of them was an activist, LGBT activist organization, advertised for people to help them prove the harm. So it was not there's not people looking for the truth. It was biased to start with. Despite that, they found that people who had what they were calling, I guess, I don't know what term they used. It was conversion therapy, sexual orientation change efforts. Anyway, people who had that kind of care, that actually their suicide rates went down after therapy.
Well, folks, in closing, I would love to hear from our three guests, Matthew, Rob, and Victor. What would you say to Patrick? And what would you say if you had the opportunity to speak to Emily? What would you say to them?
One of the things that struck me is that, well, Patrick said that why this conversion therapy doesn't work, because it never does. But both him and Emily, like, where does their authority and just the permission of affirming that comes? Because even we ourselves don't say that this kind of therapy always works 100% for everybody. It depends. Like, there are people for some of them just doesn't work because either their motivation is wrong, either they're just doing that superficially, either they're not ready to pay the price of doing that. Like, they're not ready to go back into those memories, into those things that happened and triggered that same-sex attraction, for example, or gender confusion. And if we don't say that it always works, why do they take this authority and permission to say that it never works?
Victor, I think you have a good point. They're claiming that we're saying this therapy changes everyone from exclusively same-sex attracted to exclusively opposite-sex attracted. We're not.
Yeah.
But we're not even saying, and there is no therapy in which everyone changes, and we're not saying that here either. So that's a mischaracterization of the goal of therapy, and then they're saying we don't meet that goal of therapy. It's not the goal of therapy. The goal of therapy is to help people explore their options and their capacity for change. And different people have different capacities for change, and people are different. That's fine.
That's right. And I think it's really very evident they have something seriously against someone self-identifying. Because, Patrick just wanted to impose, he wanted to give Mike an identity. And Mike was just so patiently just saying, you don't tell me who I am. I know who I am in Christ. But it's just incredible how forceful and intolerant they are. And so, of course, we don't do that to anybody else, but we, of course, hope, I don't think we do expect anymore, but we hope to receive the same treatment from others as well. But I think this is what it should be about. If Patrick is going to be talking about harm, we can talk about how LGBT ideology is harmful. It's harmful to those who have to go through surgery, because instead of changing their thoughts, they have to go through changing their sacred and God-given bodies. That is harmful. It is harmful for somebody who's trying to save their marriage. I think Victor touched on it earlier, and they want to keep their family together. It is harmful to deny these people the right to seek support. And of course, to the sexually abused as well, to go through a process of healing there. So, yeah, I think it's kind of like looking at a piece of straw in your brother's eye, and you can't see the log that is in your own eye. I think this is what we've just seen.
Yeah, I found it very interesting that is it Patrick, the guest, that he spoke a lot about bigotry, but all I can see is a bigot myself, to be honest with you, because he is not willing to even think of the possibility of somebody moving away from homosexual tendencies. He is completely closed off that idea in his mind, and that is pure prejudice and bigotry. Also, both he and Emily spoke of how damaging it could be to feel broken. She said in her article, Emily said that the therapist made her feel like she is broken. But as Christians, we believe that we are broken human beings. This is what Jesus Christ says.
Amen.
This is the truth. We are all sinners, and nobody is perfect. And there are aspects of our lives, our thinking, our very being, that means that we are broken before a holy God. And it is extremely misguided at best and arrogant at worst to say that, no, I am perfect and I will live my life as I want. What we need to do is align our thinking with what God says. And the fact is that he doesn't condemn anybody with a homosexual inclination, tendency or attractions. But what he does clearly say in the Bible is that homosexual practice is sin, and homosexual offenders will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. So people who are taking this up are really going to have to answer to the Almighty. Even more so people who are going in the media and saying it's all fine and trying to shut down anyone who's giving help, because God is the eternal God and he is right. And he doesn't lie. God is the truth. Jesus Christ is the truth. He doesn't lie.
Amen.
So we need to listen to Jesus and go to his standards of holiness. And I promise you, he is correct. And yeah, we've got to look to him and acknowledge that we're sinners, and he is completely trustworthy. And if we do give our hearts, give our lives to him, he will honor that. And he is the way to heaven, and he will take you out of that brokenness and that lostness.
Amen.
Rob,
May I ask the three gentlemen here who are giving their personal stories, does the Christian teaching make you hate yourself?
No, not at all.
I think from my perspective, it was really the love of God that motivated me, actually, because when I understood the difference between who I am as a person and what I do, and that God does see the difference, I was set free in my thinking, because I realized that actually I'm perfectly loved by a perfect Father in heaven, but it's just that He is showing me what I must do and what I must not do in order to see His blessing at work in my life. And so that motivated me to follow Him, because He loved me when I was His enemy, his enemy in my thinking and my behavior. At that point, He died for me, and therefore, knowing the love of Christ set me free to pursue His ways, knowing that I can trust Him, that it would lead to something that's better and more beautiful. So, no, I've never ever felt like God's commandments are burdensome. They are not. They are the means to a better life.
So, Laura, what I notice here is that these men are not wishing to end the right and freedom of people who identify as gay to live their lives. Why is it that we are being hounded to the point that it's hoped that what we do and who we are becomes criminalized? It's just completely unbalanced, it seems to me. Victor, I'm going to give you the last word before I encourage folk to continue with our discussion. Anything you want to add?
I just want to say that I think these kind of people, they just support this idea. And I guess there was even a comment that Victoria read from her Twitter community or whatever that was. Something that a counselor should just affirm their client's feelings or condition or whatever it may be. So that sounds to me like completely wrong. I mean, if I'm coming to a counselor and I have some, let's say, sometimes I feel like killing people or just hitting people, that counselor should just presenting me that, it's wrong. If that counselor just affirms my desires, my feelings, or whatever it may be, I mean, how is that helping me in this society? And we know that there are situations when something is intrinsically wrong, and when something just has more options. That's what a counselor should be doing to guide us in that right direction.
Well, folks, thank you so much to all of our guests for Dr. Laura Haynes's input. Once again, we're really thankful. What I want to suggest is that tomorrow, when Emily's first podcast is released, if you have the time, do listen to it and listen to the issues. I think it's very important that we not only listen, but that we also engage and we try to respond with answers as best we can to some of these issues that are being raised. So thank you once again. Please come back next week. Let's continue this. We'll have new guests and people who will have a great deal of experience in working with clients who want to move away from unwanted same-sex attractions and who have gender confusions. And I think we'll have a very good time. So thanks again, and God bless you tonight.